Your story matters, don't let it fade. When everything changed, you were made.
When everything changed, I was 16 years old, and I was kneeling at an altar. The green, scratchy carpet beneath my knees, my arms shaking from being held up for what seemed like years. A crying, screaming woman at each arm holding them up. And they were praying and speaking in tongues, and they just kept saying, just let it go. You just have to surrender. Let God move through you. And I stood there, kneeling on the floor, and I began sobbing for hours and begging and pleading because I truly believed that if it didn't happen that night, I would never be worthy. Not worthy of God, of love, or heaven. And I kept finding myself thinking about the fact that just hours before that, I was being a teenage girl in my boyfriend's truck, desperate to feel wanted. And now here I was trying to earn back something that I didn't even realize I had already lost. And I kept thinking, why would God choose me? Why would I ever be worthy of his love? And then my mouth began to move. Words I didn't understand and sounds I couldn't control, and the room erupted. You did it, praise Jesus, you're filled. And just like that, I was allowed to put my arms down. I was allowed to stop crying. I was allowed to be still. And for the first time that night, I finally felt worthy. So, before I move on with my story, I just wanted to say this. We kind of figured out are you going to say this? Are you not? But I realized that a lot of you guys don't know who I am in this room. So, I wanted to say that this is my story. It's my lived experiences, my interpretation, and it's my journey to healing and coming back home to myself. And I share my story today not to disparage anyone or to take away from anybody else's religion or beliefs or the truth that they have found in their own healing journey. I share my story today because I know what it feels like to lose yourself. And I know what it feels like to finally come back home. Because there are moments in our life that don't just change us, they split us. There's a version of you before it and a version of you after it. And one of those moments for me was the moment that I learned how to abandon myself. And the thing about moments like that, where you abandon yourself, you don't really realize until much later. So here's what I didn't understand at 16 that took me years to finally understand. That night wasn't the night that I became worthy. It was the night that I learned that love had to be earned through suffering, that my body needed to perform in order to be accepted, and that who I naturally wasn't enough. And when a belief like that takes root inside of you, it doesn't just follow you into church. It follows you into your home, into your relationships, and into your choices. And so I began to be the girl that looked for love in all of the wrong places. I gave too much, I stayed too long, and I abandoned myself before anybody else could because I truly believed that if I was just good enough or if I just did something long enough, that I would finally earn love. Because growing up, I didn't feel seen or heard or loved or supported. I grew up in chaos. And the thing about a belief like that is that it doesn't disappear when you grow up, it evolves. So, as an adult, I found myself going back to church because it was the only way that I could be good again. And I sat there in the pew and I listened to the pastor speak about things that just didn't sit right in my body. Rules and judgment and shame and who could be worthy and who could not. And there was this voice inside my body saying, this isn't right. But I ignored it because I was taught that I couldn't trust myself. And I spent 5 years in that church cultivating these amazing relationships. And I had met this woman that I was so shocked wanted to be my friend. She was this beautiful, whole, godly woman who had made sure that her kids were raised in church. And here she was talking to me, this crazy haired girl with tattoos and piercings. And I thought, okay, She wants to be my friend. So for the next 5 years, we cultivated a relationship where I thought that I was loved and accepted. And so I began telling her things about my life and about my trauma and the things that I had done and secrets that I hadn't even told anyone before. And then there was these incredible people who came into my life and they shared with me messages from God. And I thought, oh my gosh, finally, he sees me. He sees how hard I've been working. There's no way that these women could know anything about me unless it was from God. Until one day, the foundation of the last 5 years cracked underneath me. And I found out that the woman that I had believed had loved me so much and accepted me was the very person who stripped everything away. She had traded an addiction of drugs and alcohol and sex for an addiction of Jesus and church and saving people in the same way that she had been saved. So she told these women, "You have to tell Vanessa this. It's the only way she's going to be saved." And I stayed in church. I didn't leave. I thought, okay, God, here we are. I'm not turning my back on you, and you are not going to turn your back on me. He's going to see it. I'm finally going to be worthy. This is it. Until one day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. And I walked out of church. And I went home and I climbed up the stairs to my room. And there I was, kneeling on my floor again, begging and sobbing, "God, please, can't you hear me? Can I not be worthy now? I need you to give me a sign. Please give me anything, God." But there was silence. There was no booming voice, no moment of clarity handed to me. It was just me. And for the first time, I had to sit with the very real possibility that the voice I had been waiting for my entire life was my own. And it was in that moment that something sacred happened. It wasn't about losing connection. It was about reclaiming it in a way that finally felt true to me. And it was in that season that I had the realization that everything I had been taught my whole life was the very belief that kept me disconnected from myself. And healing didn't come in a lightning bolt, it came in fragments. Moments in time where my body would whisper, "This isn't right." And I would listen. And then I started questioning, why did I feel such shame for simply being a human? Why did I always feel like I had to perform in order to be accepted? And why did my body feel like a place I had to escape from instead of one that I got to live in? And one of the things that haunted me the most after I stepped away from religion was trying to understand how the hell my body did something that felt so freaking real. How could I spend my teenage years and young adult life speaking in tongues and then grow up and spend 5 years speaking in tongues? And sometimes I would go into church and it would immediately start pouring out of me. And while I was in praise and worship, and while I prayed over people and I prayed over myself, and now I couldn't do it to save my life. Those words were not coming out of my mouth. And it wasn't until one day that I sat down with my therapist and she said, "Vanessa, your body learned that church was a survival environment. What you believed was spiritual performance was actually protection." And then it made sense. My body learned how to survive in an environment in which love and acceptance and worthiness was conditional. And I realized in that I needed to make these greater changes and that my body really wasn't broken. My mind wasn't lost. My soul wasn't damaged. I was just disconnected. And I even remember this moment where I went to church one time. I had married a man, so guess what that meant? I was having sex in marriage. I was dressing the way I was supposed to be dressing. I wasn't cussing. I wasn't drinking. I was doing it all right. I had to be good enough. And I was at church and I was praying and I was like, all right, I got this. And then the pastor came up to me and he placed his large hand on my head, gripping it firmly, shaking, and he began to pray over me and speak in tongues. And then speaking in a language for everybody else to understand as well. And he began to pray over me, prayed for God to save my soul, to release the sins out of my life, the demons that made me unworthy, and to save me from myself. And I thought, well, damn, even now, I'm still being told that there's something wrong with me. And when I stepped away from church, it came at a cost too. I finally told my loved ones and the people that I was closest with that I had walked away from something that had made me feel so unworthy for so long. And I was finally happy. I no longer felt like I wasn't enough, and I was able to do things and experience things and finally feel the way that I had felt my whole life without guilt. And instead of being faced with happiness and support, they looked at me in disgust. And they also walked away from me. And in a small town, when you make a decision like that, it doesn't stay quiet for very long. And man, those rumors. I learned things about me and my husband I didn't even know. We were living our best life. We just didn't catch up yet, apparently. But something else happened as well. The feeling of not having external acceptance no longer became more painful than losing myself. And then my family began to change. They became lighter and more at peace and happier. And then my children began coming to me and sharing with me all of the ways that they themselves hadn't felt safe in church. And all the things that they had done in church because they thought it was going to make mom happy. And it was in that moment that I finally realized that I wasn't just breaking a cycle for myself. I was breaking it for my children and those I loved. And that wasn't rebellion. That was coming home. It was coming home back to my body, to my truth, to my worth. And that realization didn't just change my life. It actually changed the lens through which I lead today. So now I'm the owner of Starlight and Sage, and I get to help other people discover the difference between performance and truth. And I get to help women rediscover parts of themselves that they had abandoned and learned how to silence because somebody told them that they had to. And I taught myself so many different holistic healing modalities, and I get to be this beautiful support for women who didn't even know that they had a voice, or get to experience things that they have never gotten to experience because they were met with so much judgment and shame. And I get to be that support person for them now. And it's not because I have all of the answers, it's because I know what it feels like to be disconnected. And I know how beautiful it is to finally come back home to yourself. And what I've learned is that there's a couple of ways that we disconnect from ourselves. We first disconnect from our body. We ignore our intuition. We override exhaustion. We feel like we need to perform in order to earn our worth. And then we disconnect from our truth. We shrink. We silence ourselves. We say yes when we mean no. And eventually, we disconnect from our worth. We become smaller versions of ourselves, believing that love must be earned. But healing isn't becoming someone new. Healing is coming back to the version of yourself that you learned how to abandon because the world told you that you had to. And so, what I want to do with all of you guys today, if you feel safe, I would love it if you could close your eyes for a moment. And as you close your eyes, I want you to take some nice, deep breaths in through your nose and gently blow the breath out through your mouth, slowly placing one hand on your heart and one on your belly, keeping that beautiful, deep breath going. And I want you to ask yourself, where have I learned that I'm not enough? And I don't want you to judge it or fix it. Just breathe. And then, if we could take a nice, deep, collective breath together, gently opening your eyes again. Awareness is where everything begins. I used to think that night at 16 years old was the moment that I found God. But now I understand it was the moment that I lost myself. And it's funny because I used to believe that this sign was a sign of worthiness, of acceptance. I used to think of it as pleading and asking something outside of myself to finally say, I'm enough. But now, when I raise my arms, it's because I'm dancing in my kitchen like a crazy person, or I'm cheering for someone, or I'm cheering for myself. Because I finally came home. Home to my body, home to my truth, and home to my worth. You were never meant to earn love through suffering. You were never meant to earn worthiness through performance. You have always been worthy. Not when you get it right, not when you're chosen, but exactly as you are right now. Thank you.
Your story matters.